How might a man be convinced to renounce all of his blessings, to reject his history, to relinquish his ancestral birthright? How could he be duped into allowing the things that should bring him happiness to instead bring him despair? Utilizing their mastery of an esoteric, symbolic language, Hollywood's creative minds have, over the past century, embarked upon an unprecedented cultural experiment, with Western man as its subject. Their goal, put simply, is to turn us against our culture, our heritage, and ourselves, through convincing us that our reality is an enslaving fiction. In Peter Weir's 1998 film, The Truman Show, young insurance salesman Truman Burbank discovers that his charmed life in the idyllic town of Sea Haven is an illusion designed to control him. He is in fact the star of a reality TV show. His friends, family, and wife Meryl are paid actors, and his hometown is nothing more than an elaborate studio set. Every moment in his life, from his birth to his father's staged death to his marriage, are storylines in a grand narrative thought up by Christoph, the show's creator and director. Driven by his desire to reunite with Sylvia, the woman who tried to awaken him to the true nature of his reality, Truman finally overcomes his fear of the water and crosses the artificial sea separating Sea Haven from the outside world. Crashing into the painted canopy that served as his sky, and finding an exit built into it, he is confronted by Christoph, who compels him to stay in Sea Haven, telling Truman that there is no more truth in the world beyond than in the world he has created. Truman, turning and speaking directly to the viewing audience, exits the stage. The crowds cheer. Cut transmission. A familiarity with Hollywood's symbolic language empowers one to make a number of critical observations as to what the creators of The Truman Show are attempting to do, the narrative mechanisms they employ to do this, and the underlying motivations that drive them. Firstly, they are engaging in a critique of Western culture and society in order to foster alienation from its norms, values, and history. Sea Haven, initially presented to the audience as an idealized microcosm of 1950s white America, is quickly revealed as a cynical deconstruction of it. A wealthy, privileged town of white houses, white picket fences, and white people, its only diverse faces are relegated to token roles as smiling extras. We later learn that it is built inside a literal bubble, cut off from the cosmopolitan modern world. Its Norman Rockwell-esque aesthetics are presented as commercialist kitsch. Its old-time values of family and community are mocked as clichés, and its old-fashioned denizens are depicted as anachronistic stock characters. More, the traditional American life that it represents is portrayed as a conspiracy of lies designed to deceive and control us. In one scene deceptively rich in symbolism, Truman, leafing through the family photo album, comes across a photograph from a childhood trip to Mount Rushmore, the iconic symbol of American history. In it we see a young Truman dressed as a cowboy, the archetype of the American mythos, stood in front of an obvious studio prop of the famous monument. Truman remarks, "It looks so small." It does not take much reflection to grasp the true intended meaning of this sequence. Under scrutiny, the American history that Mount Rushmore symbolizes is exposed as a fraud. Secondly, the creators of The Truman Show are attempting to undermine the institutions of marriage and the nuclear family by framing them as mundane and repressive. Truman's wife, Meryl, a caricature of the archetypal American housewife, is portrayed as a vapid, domesticated busybody, spouting wholesome clichés in between transparent attempts to plug domestic products. When she is confronted with Truman's desire to travel the world, she scoffs and reminds him of his myriad duties and responsibilities, suggesting that starting a family would be just as much of an adventure. We later learn that to entrap Truman with fatherhood is Christoph's master plan to bind him to Sea Haven forever, and this thematic association between family life and imprisonment recurs throughout the film. At one stage we observe Truman as a child, framed behind a baby gate, its bars like those of a prison cell. Even Truman's wedding ring is implied to contain a hidden surveillance camera. In another sequence loaded with symbolic imagery, Merrill promotes a newly purchased kitchen utensil to the show's audience, while an unknowing Truman, crouched upon all fours, tends to the front lawn. Upon analysis, this scene is revealed as a coded critique of the traditional gender roles of married domestic life, man as laborer and woman as homemaker, framing them as cliched, oppressive, and meaningless. Merrill even resembles the cartoon mascot printed upon the box, implying that the traditional feminine role she represents is merely an artificial construct. Third, the Truman Show attempts to engender a state of social atomization in the viewer by fomenting distrust of one's family, friends, and neighbors. Every resident of Sea Haven is a paid actor, and they are all complicit in the conspiracy to deceive Truman and perpetuate his false reality. His best friend Marlon receives lines and directions from Christoph through a headset. His on-set father participated in the faking of his own traumatic death in order to manufacture Truman's fear of the water. Everything in Truman's world, save for his own atomized self, is a lie perpetrated in order to enslave him. Fourth, the film's creators endeavor to foment resentment against conservative social forces that might seek to protect them from destructive cultural influences. Christoph, the show's creator, has isolated Sea Haven from the modern world, which he condemns as sick and evil. He has, in effect, created a controlled habitat to preserve a timeline in which Western society was never subjected to the demoralizing forces of cultural Marxism. For this, he is characterized as a megalomaniacal tyrant, unnaturally attached to his nostalgia for an obsolete past world that never even really existed to begin with. Lastly, the film undertakes to instill a sense of oikophobia, defined as fear or hatred of one's home and native society, into the viewer. In this context, Fiji serves as an obvious metaphor for liberation from Western culture and civilization. In Truman's words, you can't get any further away before you start coming back. The Truman Show, then, is a manifesto for a worldview that presents the self as the only truth and the fulfillment of personal desires as the only valid purpose. Family and community are mere limitations imposed upon us by others for their own selfish ends. Parenthood and marriage are repressive and suffocating. Walls and borders are built not to protect us from a hostile outside world, but to hide the riches of that world from us. Our culture is nothing more than a proliferation of commercial products. Our traditions are a set of tired cliches, and our history is a pious fiction. And all of it, the film proposes, must be rejected if we wish to be free. The Truman Show asks that we relinquish our role as the protagonist of our own story and step off the world stage, as Truman stepped off Christoph's set. But the Truman Show is no isolated cultural anomaly. A cursory analysis of the history of Hollywood film reveals the continual recurrence of its central themes. In 1998's Pleasantville, the white inhabitants of a wholesome 1950s sitcom discover the falsity of their idyllic world, rebelling against its values with the help of two 90s teenagers. In 2001's Vanilla Sky, a wealthy white publishing magnate learns that his life of wealth and privilege is in fact a computer simulation, from which he is only able to free himself through suicide. In 1997's The Game, a rich white investment banker discovers that his privileged life is the source of his despair, and only learns to live authentically after everything is taken from him. The real message of The Truman Show, and all of these corresponding narratives, is simply this: you'll have nothing, and you'll be happy. The hostile faction that controls Hollywood wants us to willingly sacrifice our birthright so they can claim it for themselves. They frame every blessing as a burden so that we will cast off our blessings. They seek to alienate us from our heritage so that we will not fight to defend it. They atomize us to render us vulnerable to their propaganda. It is simply tribal cultural warfare, waged through memes and narratives. The destructive consequences of this hostile cultural takeover are now more than evident. Hollywood's illusions have engineered masses of deracinated people, programmed only to behave in accord with the will of the men who have shaped their reality. Alienated from their own heritage and unmoored from the things that give life meaning, they seek fulfillment in the untrammeled pursuit of personal desires, in foreign lands and foreign cultures, in ideology and social activism. Their own culture they have been trained to treat with contempt, fear, and hatred, so that a simple image of wholesome family life now serves as a powerful psychological trigger. Conditioned to see everything life-affirming as necessarily false and repressive, nihilism has become their only truth, and in the void they see the promise of freedom. And as a result of all this, they respond to the destruction of their societies and the theft of their birthright with shrugging indifference or even twisted enthusiasm. After all, shouldn't we want to free ourselves from this white, Western world? Isn't it full of tired cliches and stock characters? Wasn't it built to deceive and control us? They say that hindsight is 20/20, and time has indeed laid bare the depths of the deception perpetrated upon our people. We have earned no freedom through breaking the bonds of the past. We have found no fulfillment in sacrificing the birthright of our ancestors. There is no light beyond the door that Truman walked through, but only darkness. In 2022's world of globalism, degeneracy, white guilt, multiculturalism, and medical tyranny, one can readily imagine the same people who would have once unquestioningly embraced the film's worldview, instead pounding their fists on the other side of Sea Haven's walls, desperate to get in. We have seen what our enemies call truth, and we reject it. We want our truth, a world shaped by our will, made in our image. We want the world our ancestors built for us, before they were duped into giving it away. If we are to live by a script, let it be one we have written. If we are to live in a bubble, let it be one we have built. Sometimes freedom is found inside the walls.